I had always believed living out here in the middle of nowhere meant peace. I pictured quiet mornings with the sun rising over the fields, birds chirping, and maybe the occasional raccoon sneaking past my porch. My barn sat comfortably at the edge of the property, a little weathered, holding my tools, a couple of tractors, and some memories I wasn't ready to let go of. It wasn't much, just a barn, nothing worth sending an army after. But apparently in the eyes of HOA Karen, it was a ticking time bomb. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter, well, technically a text message, because of course Karen had gone digital. "This is a notice that a patrol has been dispatched to inspect your barn," it read. At first I laughed. My barn inspected? By a patrol? I put the phone down, convinced it was a prank. Maybe Karen had run out of actual violations to enforce and needed a new hobby. I imagined her at the HOA meeting, furiously taking notes on my barn's paint color, the angle of the roof, or whether the cows were aligned correctly in the pasture. But then the text came again, this time from an unknown number. "We are en route, be ready." My laughter died in my throat. There was no prank here, they were actually coming. I paced the length of the barn, trying to decide what being ready even meant in this context. Did I offer them cookies, stand quietly and nod, or prepare for battle because Karen's idea of enforcement might be overkill? I peeked through the barn window and saw them in the distance. Uniformed, clipboards in hand, walking in a way that suggested they were expecting a full-scale military operation instead of a humble barn. My heart started to beat a little faster. I knew Karen's obsession with rules was bad, but this was something else. Her little patrol looked at the barn with a mix of fear, suspicion, and maybe even awe. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, stay calm, this is still just a barn, and yet the creeping dread in my stomach told me Karen wasn't going to stop here. The thought of facing these people armed with clipboards and regulations was almost comical, but there was a tense undertone that made my skin prickle. They were serious, deadly serious. I thought back to the neighborhood gossip. Karen sent someone to inspect my mailbox, one neighbor had told me, and they measured it for 2 hours, then issued a fine because the post leaned 3 degrees too far to the left. I laughed at that memory, but now I realized I was about to experience my own live version of one of those stories, and if my mailbox inspection was anything like this, I was in for a long, absurd day. The sound of crunching gravel made me freeze. They were closer now. I crouched behind the barn door, peeking out just enough to see their faces. The leader, a man in mirrored sunglasses, had a grim set to his jaw like he was about to negotiate a hostage situation rather than check the structural integrity of my shed. I swallowed hard and thought, okay, deep breaths, don't freak out, remember, it's just a barn. I slowly approached the door, trying to look casual like I wasn't about to engage in a full-scale standoff. They saw me, and I swear I could almost hear the collective gasp in unison. Clipboards paused midair, pens frozen. They weren't expecting me to actually answer the door. Maybe they assumed barns greeted themselves. I opened it, and for a moment time slowed. Their eyes scanned the interior of the barn, suspicious and nervous. I gave them a small, polite nod. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice calm, trying not to laugh at the absurdity. "I hear you're here to inspect my barn." The leader cleared his throat. "Yes, we are. This is standard HOA procedure." Standard? Right. Because normal barn ownership apparently requires a full-scale inspection by people who think measuring hay bales is a federal offense. As I stepped aside to let them in, or at least let them think they could enter, I felt a twinge of excitement. Something told me this inspection was about to get very interesting. And somewhere deep down, a little spark of mischief lit up. Because if Karen thought she was coming into my barn and getting away with intimidation, she was about to learn that I played by my own rules. And in the next few minutes, I was going to show her just how far. I barely had time to blink before the crunch of gravel announced the patrol's arrival. From the corner of the barn, I could see them getting out of their vehicles, clipboards in hand, sunglasses reflecting the sun like they were on some federal stakeout. My stomach tightened, not with fear exactly, but with that uneasy mix of anticipation and amusement you get when absurdity turns dangerously real. They were taking this seriously. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or prepare for battle. They marched up to the barn like soldiers approaching a war zone, scanning every nail, every beam, every shadow as if they were hunting contraband instead of checking that my hay bales weren't stacked at a non-compliant angle. One of them squinted at the door, whispered something to the other, and tapped his pen against the clipboard like a nervous percussionist. I stepped back into the shadows, letting them think they had the upper hand. As the leader raised his hand to knock, I could see his jaw tense. He expected resistance, or at least a stern glare from me. What he got instead was a small smirk. I opened the door wider, deliberately letting them linger in that moment of uncertainty. "Welcome," I said, my voice calm, but carrying just enough edge to make them wonder what they'd gotten themselves into. "I hear you're here for an inspection." There was a pause. One of the patrols shuffled his feet. Another adjusted his clipboard like it might shield him from the reality of what was happening. I could almost hear the thought process in their heads. Is this a joke? Are there actual weapons behind that door? Are we about to be fired on? The tension in the air was almost tangible. Then I felt that familiar thrill, the one that always hits when a plan you've been keeping close to your chest is about to unfold. I stepped aside, letting the light fall on me in a way that made my posture seem casual but deliberate. And that's when I heard the whisper I'd been waiting for. "Oh no, is that?" The patrol's leader was already sweating slightly, his eyes darting. They were realizing slowly that this was not going to be a normal barn inspection. I took a step further inside, and with every movement I could feel their unease grow. Their clipboards wobbled in their hands, pens hovering as if ready to scribble possible threat on the spot. I tried to keep a straight face as I imagined Karen packing somewhere, her voice rising with panic over the phone. The thought of her yelling, hands flailing, orders flying in every direction, it was almost cinematic. Almost. Then came the first knock on the inner barn wall, a faint but deliberate thump. My heart rate picked up. They weren't just here to inspect. They were testing the waters, trying to see if I'd respond. I responded, all right. I reached into the shadows behind me and signaled. My team, my SWAT team, moved like shadows themselves, fully geared and ready, though completely silent. The patrol froze mid-step, and I could almost hear the collective intake of breath. The leader swallowed hard, adjusting his sunglasses as if that alone could restore his courage. We need to check the barn thoroughly," he stammered. "Standard HOA protocol." His voice was shaky, betraying the cool authority he had hoped to project. I smiled, letting the tension linger just a second longer. "Of course," I said slowly, letting the words hang like a warning. "Just go ahead." And that's when I saw it, the subtle shift in their body language, the tiny stutter in their step, the nervous glances. My plan was working perfectly. They had no idea what they were walking into. I took a step back, pretending to inspect some hay myself while my eyes scanned their faces. Fear, disbelief, and confusion played across every one of them. It was like watching kittens corner a tiger and not realizing it yet. Karen had sent a patrol to intimidate me, but she hadn't counted on me turning the tables. Outside, the gravel crunched again. More cars approached, probably Karen's reinforcements. I didn't flinch. In fact, I let the suspense build, knowing that the moment they saw my SWAT team fully assembled, it would be too late for them to back down. The absurdity of the situation was almost too delicious. A quiet barn, a couple of overgrown haystacks, and a group of bureaucrats expecting to enforce the law, and yet here we were on the brink of chaos. And just like that, I realized something. This wasn't just about a barn anymore. It was about sending a message, about standing your ground in the most ridiculous war imaginable. And if Karen thought she was going to intimidate me, she was about to get a full, unforgettable lesson in overreach. The tension stretched. Every second felt like a heartbeat in slow motion. They didn't know what was coming next, and neither did Karen, packing somewhere, about to realize that the barn inspection she thought would be easy had just turned into a full-blown standoff. I had barely let the patrol step inside the barn when I gave the signal. From the shadows, my SWAT team emerged like something out of a movie. Fully geared, tactical vests gleaming, helmets in place, faces unreadable. I could see it in an instant. The patrol went from cautiously confident to wide-eyed panic. Their clipboards wobbled in their hands, pens frozen in midair as if they were suddenly considering turning into professionals in Dance to Escape. The leader of the patrol blinked several times, clearly trying to convince himself that what he was seeing wasn't real. "Is this, real?" he stammered. I couldn't help but smile at the sheer absurdity of the question. Yes, it was real, and it was going to get even more real in a moment. "Standard protocol," I said cheerfully, letting my voice echo through the barn. "We always have the team on standby for inspections, just in case of unexpected violations." I gestured vaguely at the men behind me. They were perfectly still, like statues with rifles slung over their shoulders. Not a single move betrayed the fact that they were absolutely ready to take control if things went sideways. The patrol leader's lip twitched, probably trying to contain the panic that was bubbling over. I took a step closer, careful to keep my voice calm but my words deliberate. "You see, we like to make sure the barn is secure. Safety first, always safety first." A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. I signed up for a barn inspection, not a military standoff. One of the younger patrol members whispered something nervously to the other, and I caught a glimpse of him glancing at the ceiling, probably calculating whether the rafters could support a ladder escape. The humor of the situation wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression serious. If I smiled too much, it might encourage them to panic even more. I wanted controlled chaos, a slow burn of suspense, not outright hysteria, at least not yet. Meanwhile, I could feel the tension building outside. Karen, undoubtedly on the phone, was packing somewhere, ranting about the sheer audacity of the situation. I could almost hear her imagined voice. "They're armed, my patrol is outnumbered. Who even allowed a SWAT team in a barn?" The thought made me suppress a laugh. This was going exactly the way I had hoped. Karen losing control while her loyal patrol fumbled like deer in headlights. I decided it was time to assert a little more pressure. I know inspections can be stressful, I said, keeping my tone calm, almost soothing, but we like to take them seriously, really seriously. I let my gaze sweep across the barn, lingering briefly on the SWAT team, making sure the patrol noticed every piece of equipment, every stance, every silent nod among the team members. Their confidence, or rather the perception of it, was palpable. Then the leader attempted to speak again. We just need to verify some minor code compliance. His voice faltered as he realized he had nothing concrete to leverage against us. Minor code compliance? That was like sending a paper airplane to intercept a fighter jet. I nodded politely, letting the suspense stretch for a moment longer. You'll have full access, I said finally, letting my words hang in the air like a warning. But be careful, we don't want any accidents. Safety, remember? The young patrol officer nearly jumped out of his boots, and I caught a glance between the two of them, utter disbelief. I took another step back, letting the SWAT team shift subtly. Just a small movement, nothing dramatic, but enough to remind the patrol who really controlled the situation. The leader muttered under his breath something that sounded like a curse and glanced at his team as if seeking moral support. There was none to be found. They were trapped in this ridiculous scenario, and it was only going to escalate. As I watched them, I realized something. The barn inspection was no longer just an inspection. It was a psychological game, a test of nerves. Every twitch, every hesitation from the patrol made me grin behind my calm. I had turned the tables completely. Karen's plan to intimidate me had backfired spectacularly. And the best part, this was just the beginning. The main event hadn't even started yet. Somewhere in the distance, tires crunched on gravel. More reinforcements were on their way, and when they arrived and saw my team standing silently in the barn, I knew the panic would reach a new level. The patrol leader cleared his throat again, his voice barely audible over the tension in the room. We should continue inspection?" he asked, hope flickering like a candle in a storm. I smiled faintly and nodded, letting him stew in uncertainty. Little did he know, Karen was about to discover that inspections aren't always what they seem, especially when she's underestimated the people she's trying to control. And just like that, the barn, which had always been quiet, became a stage for the beginning of something far bigger and far more entertaining than anyone could have imagined. I could almost hear Karen's voice shrieking through the phone, even though I wasn't on the line with her yet. Somewhere in her house, she was packing, probably waving her arms like she was conducting an orchestra of chaos. "They're armed, my patrol is outnumbered. Who allowed a SWAT team to be in a barn?" I imagined the words bouncing off her walls, echoing into the neighborhood like a warning siren. The absurdity made me stifle a laugh, but I had to stay calm. The patrol in my barn certainly wasn't laughing. The leader of the HOA patrol was sweating profusely, muttering under his breath as he flipped through his clipboard. Every measurement, every tiny note he thought was important seemed to evaporate under the weight of my SWAT team's silent presence. I could almost see his brain overworking, trying to reconcile a barn inspection with what looked more like a military operation. Sir, this is highly irregular," he stammered. We need to document this." His pen hovered over the paper, trembling. I leaned casually against a support beam, nodding as if encouraging him, letting the tension stretch just a fraction longer. There was something delicious about the way their confidence had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Outside, I heard tires crunching on the gravel again, more vehicles, probably Karen's reinforcements, approaching like backup in some absurd war movie. The patrol leader's eyes widened as he glanced toward the barn doors. The moment he realized more people were coming, panic flickered across his face. His team whispered frantically, clearly unsure whether to advance or retreat. I let the suspense simmer. The anticipation was half the fun. I decided it was time to turn up the pressure slightly. "Don't worry," I said, my tone calm, almost soothing. "We take inspections very seriously here. Safety is our #1 priority. Really, it's just a formality, but mistakes happen, accidents happen, you understand, right?" Their eyes darted between me and the team behind me, every muscle in their bodies betraying their nerves. The tension was so thick you could slice it with a knife or maybe a clipboard. I watched the leader fumble with his radio, clearly trying to call Karen, probably reporting that the situation had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. I could hear the panic in his whispered words. They have full tactical gear, what do we do?" I imagined Karen's shriek on the other end. Back up immediately." She had clearly lost control, and the thought sent a small thrill through me. Even more amusing was the younger patrol member, who kept glancing at the ceiling, probably calculating the optimal escape route via the rafters. Every twitch, every hesitant step they took made me grin inside. This was psychological warfare at its finest, without even firing a shot. The absurdity of bureaucrats in fear of a barn was almost too good to be true. "Just follow the procedures," I said calmly, letting the words hang in the air like a subtle warning. And we'll all get along fine. No one wants accidents, right? I didn't move, but my SWAT team shifted slightly, just enough that the patrol noticed. It was a subtle reminder I was calm, prepared, and in control. I could imagine Karen at this exact moment, her hair disheveled, papers scattered across her kitchen counter, barking orders at invisible minions, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. She had called in reinforcements, and soon they would arrive, probably thinking they were about to rescue a helpless patrol. Instead, they would walk straight into the same tension-filled barn, facing a situation that was already spiraling out of control. The leader finally cleared his throat, his voice shaking. We should probably proceed with the inspection," he said, hoping that some semblance of normalcy could be restored. I nodded slowly, letting the suspense build just a little longer. Every second felt like hours, every glance from the patrol a mix of fear and awe. Somewhere down the street, I could hear the gravel crunching again. The reinforcements were almost here. Karen was about to discover the full extent of what she had unleashed by sending a patrol to my barn. And when she did, the panic, the chaos, the sheer absurdity of it all, it was going to be unforgettable. The patrol shifted nervously, pens shaking, clipboards trembling, and I realized with a quiet satisfaction that Karen's carefully orchestrated intimidation campaign had already failed spectacularly. They had come for a barn, but what they found instead was a silent, calculated force that had turned the entire encounter into something completely different, something unforgettable. And the best part, it was only getting started. I stepped out into the open, letting the sunlight hit the barnyard. The crunch of gravel under more approaching vehicles told me Karen had sent her reinforcements. My SWAT team stayed behind me, silent and still, every one of them radiating calm authority. I let the patrol see me clearly now, casual, confident, like this was just another day at the barn. The leader of the HOA patrol swallowed hard and adjusted his sunglasses, probably thinking that somehow this would restore his credibility. It didn't, not even close. We need to ensure compliance," he said, voice faltering as the reality of the situation settled over him. I smiled faintly. "Of course," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "I understand inspections are serious, but maybe we should discuss a few things before anyone gets uncomfortable." I gestured vaguely toward my SWAT team. Their presence was unmistakable, silent, imposing, and completely legal. The patrol exchanged nervous glances. You could almost hear the thought bubble over their heads. Did we sign up for a barn inspection or a hostage negotiation? And that's when I saw Karen's car screech onto the driveway. She jumped out, hair slightly windblown, her face flushed with determination and pure panic. I could hear her yelling into her phone, "They're not complying, the barn, I let her rant play out for a moment. She was trying so hard to assert control, but the scene before her was one she hadn't anticipated. I raised a hand casually as if to greet her, letting the tension simmer. "Karen, good to see you," I said, smiling faintly. "I hear you're concerned about the barn." She froze mid-step, eyes darting to my SWAT team, then back at me. I could practically see her brain scrambling for a way to take command of a situation she had already lost. Remove them, immediately," she shouted, pointing at the team behind me. Her voice carried that mix of authority and hysteria that only Karen could pull off. The patrol leader flinched. One of her reinforcements took a cautious step forward, probably hoping their presence would restore some order. It didn't, not by a long shot. I stayed calm, letting her energy crash against my composure like waves on rocks. "I'm afraid that's not possible," I said evenly. "They're part of my property security, standard procedure, just in case of unexpected situations." I could see the panic in her eyes grow, the realization dawning that she had no real leverage here. Karen's face twisted with frustration. "This is outrageous, I've never seen such defiance." Her words came out fast, jagged, like sparks flying from a fire. I chuckled under my breath. She didn't realize that her own panic was now part of the performance, adding tension for everyone watching, including the neighbors who had started peeking over fences. I decided to press a little, testing the boundaries. "Of course, we all want to comply with HOA rules," I said, my tone measured. "But I also want to make sure this goes smoothly, no one gets hurt, safety first." My eyes swept across the patrol, letting them feel the silent pressure. They didn't know whether to take notes, retreat, or ask for backup, each option more absurd than the last. One of her reinforcements finally spoke, voice small and uncertain. Maybe we can just measure the barn, take some photos." The attempt to sound professional fell flat in the face of my composed SWAT team, and I almost laughed out loud. It was like watching toddlers negotiate with soldiers. Karen's hands flew to her hips. "Measure, photos, I demand compliance." I let the moment stretch, letting the tension build. Every second, the suspense thickened. Every twitch from her patrol told me they were close to losing it entirely. and I knew that once they realized the legal and tactical advantage was mine, it would be over. I took a step closer, just enough to assert subtle dominance, and said, I want this to go smoothly. Let's talk about what's really important. Rules are rules, of course, but maybe we can agree that some common sense goes a long way. The words were calm, but the implication was clear. One wrong move from them and the situation would escalate in ways Karen couldn't even imagine. She froze, realizing for the first time that she was no longer in control. Her reinforcements shifted nervously, glancing at each other, unsure of what to do next. The barn inspection had become a standoff, a negotiation, and a silent war of wills all at once. And I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Karen might have sent the patrol, but the game had changed. The next move was hers, and I was ready. I could see it in her eyes. Karen's panic was no longer contained. Her perfect little plan to intimidate me had completely unraveled, and the reality of the situation was sinking in one horrifying second at a time. My SWAT team stood silently behind me, unmoving and utterly composed, while Karen's reinforcements hesitated at the edge of the gravel driveway, unsure if they should advance or retreat. Every second stretched, thick with tension, and I couldn't help but savor it. Karen's voice shrieked again, almost high-pitched with frustration. This is unacceptable. I demand compliance. Remove them now. She pointed at my team, as if sheer willpower could make them vanish. Her patrol flinched, glancing at each other, realizing that they had no backup capable of enforcing her orders. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear, and I fought the urge to laugh outright. One of her reinforcements finally stepped forward, voice quivering. Ma'am, maybe we can just take photos, measure the barn, it's standard protocol. The suggestion fell flat in the presence of my fully armored team, and I allowed a faint, amused smirk to curl across my face. These people were out of their depth. They didn't just underestimate me, they underestimated the entire scenario down to the smallest detail of planning. Karen's hands flew to her head, hair slightly disheveled, eyes wide. Photos, measuring, do you think this is a joke? She snapped, trying to assert control, but her words only highlighted how badly she had lost it. I kept my tone calm, deliberate, measured, letting the suspense build naturally. Every moment, every twitch in her stance, every shallow breath she took heightened the tension. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was a full-blown psychological battle, and I was winning. I leaned slightly forward, letting my eyes sweep over the patrol and her reinforcements, letting them feel the silent pressure of my team behind me. Safety first, I said evenly. We all want a smooth inspection, right? No one wants accidents, misunderstandings, or surprises. My words hung in the air like a threat disguised as civility. I could see the realization settle over Karen's reinforcements. They were completely outclassed, outmaneuvered, and out of ideas. The leader of the patrol swallowed hard and fumbled with his clipboard. We will just follow procedures, he muttered, hoping that formal language could salvage some dignity. I nodded politely, but my smirk betrayed the amusement I felt. Procedures, rules, in this scenario, they were meaningless. Control had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even Karen, standing rigidly, her hands clenching at her sides. The tension reached a new level when a neighbor, probably curious or concerned, peeked over the fence. I caught their eye and gave a small, knowing nod. That silent acknowledgement made the absurdity of the situation even more vivid. Karen noticed, of course, and her frustration flared. Everyone's watching, you can't just, she faltered, realizing that appearances weren't going to help her anymore. I decided it was time to press the advantage. I want this to go smoothly, I said slowly, letting each word sink in. No one wants this to escalate further, but I need to make sure that the inspection doesn't interfere with ongoing operations. My gaze flicked subtly toward my team, letting them shift imperceptibly. The patrol and Karen's reinforcements stiffened immediately. Every movement was calculated, every glance deliberate. Then her phone rang again. I could see the panic spike in her eyes as she fumbled to answer, probably calling someone she thought could restore order. Whatever words were spoken on the other end only made her shoulders slump slightly, another clear indication that she had no leverage. The tension was palpable. Karen's threats escalated, but I remained calm, letting them roll off my shoulders. Fines, citations, that's not necessary, I said smoothly. Let's focus on what matters, the safety of everyone here. Common sense goes a long way. Her face twisted with disbelief. The patrol's pens hovered over paper, hands trembling. This was no longer about compliance. It was about survival, for their confidence, for Karen's ego, for the illusion of control. Every second, every microreaction built suspense. Karen realized she had lost control. The reinforcements were useless, the patrol was intimidated, and I was perfectly calm, letting the tension stretch, savoring the ridiculousness of the scenario. This barn, which had always been a quiet place, had transformed into a stage for a slow-burn standoff that Karen had no idea how to handle. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew the best was yet to come. The main confrontation, the real showdown, was only a matter of time. Karen thought she was in charge, but she was about to discover that sending a patrol to my barn was the first mistake in a series of very, very expensive lessons. By the time Karen's reinforcements had finally pulled into the driveway, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. My barn, once a quiet, dusty relic of simpler days, had transformed into a stage for an epic confrontation. The HOA patrol, already rattled beyond belief, now looked like deer caught in headlights, while Karen herself stormed forward, face red with fury and panic. I stayed calm, leaning casually against the barn's support beam, letting the sunlight catch the edge of my tactical gear just enough to make the shadows behind me look imposing. My SWAT team stood perfectly still, like statues frozen in anticipation, and the effect was immediate. Karen faltered. Her confident swagger vanished in an instant, replaced by a mix of confusion and disbelief. This is ridiculous," she yelled, her voice high-pitched with frustration. "I demand that your team leave immediately. This is harassment." She pointed at the SWAT members as if sheer outrage could make them vanish. I raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch, watching her energy collide with calm and control. Every second was a spotlight on her unraveling composure. The patrol leader tried to interject, voice shaking. Ma'am, maybe we can proceed with the inspection," but his words barely registered. His hands trembled, clipboards quivering, while my SWAT team maintained that terrifying calm that made even the bravest officers hesitate. I decided it was time to escalate just enough to finish the first act. "Inspection," I said slowly, letting the word hang like a loaded pause. "Of course, by all means take your notes, but let's keep things safe, shall we?" My gaze swept across Karen's reinforcements, who were now fully aware that they were walking into a standoff they had no idea how to control. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "Safe? You call this safe? You're intimidating my team. This is..." She stopped mid-sentence, probably realizing that no words could reverse the situation. Her eyes flicked nervously to the SWAT members behind me, then back to me. I let my calm demeanor speak louder than any words could. The neighbors, who had been watching from the fences and porches, now leaned forward in silent awe. The crunch of gravel under arriving cars and the hum of distant engines added to the cinematic tension. Karen, who had always thrived on control, was powerless. And I was perfectly calm, savoring every microsecond of the chaos I had orchestrated. I stepped a little closer, making sure to keep my tone measured, almost conversational. "Karen," I said softly, letting each syllable sink in, "I understand your concerns, really I do, but perhaps this is a good opportunity to reconsider how we approach inspections. Common sense, safety, cooperation." My words were gentle, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. Her reinforcements shuffled awkwardly, clearly second-guessing the entire plan. The patrol leader's mouth opened, then closed again. No one knew what to do, and at that exact moment I knew the climax had arrived. The showdown was fully. Karen's voice rose one last time. "You think you can intimidate me? You think this is funny? I will," but I held up a hand, signaling calm. The SWAT team adjusted, slightly silent and ominous, letting their presence amplify the tension. The room, the barn, the driveway, even the gravel underfoot seemed to pause. Karen realized finally that she had no leverage. No citations, no fines, no patrol could intimidate the calm, controlled force before her. Then the quiet shift happened. Karen froze. The words she had prepared for every imagined confrontation disappeared, replaced by a blank realization she had lost completely. The neighbors, the patrol, the reinforcements, they all felt it. She was powerless. The barn, a humble structure, had become a fortress. Her authority, a fragile illusion, had crumbled under logic, calm, and preparation. I gave her a small, final nod. "We're done here," I said simply. No anger, no triumph, just calm control. And with that, Karen stormed off, muttering threats that held no weight, while her team slunk behind her, defeated. My SWAT members quietly packed up, moving with smooth efficiency, leaving a trail of awe and disbelief in their wake. The barn, finally quiet again, seemed to exhale along with me. The tension ebbed, leaving only the hum of victory. I reflected on the absurdity of bureaucracy, the ridiculous lengths people go to assert control, and the satisfaction of standing your ground. This wasn't just a win over Karen. It was in patience, strategy, and knowing exactly when to hold your calm in the face of chaos. As the neighbors slowly dispersed, whispering stories that would become legends in the neighborhood, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The showdown had ended, but the lesson lingered. Never underestimate a calm mind, a well-prepared team, and a barn that refuses to be intimidated. And deep down, I knew one thing for certain: Karen might try again. But next time she would be met with even more preparation and a little more surprise. The barn was quiet again, almost eerily so. The tension that had gripped the driveway, the yard, and even the surrounding street seemed to evaporate, leaving only the lingering echoes of disbelief. Karen was gone, storming off, probably calling every HOA member she could think of to explain how things got out of control while her patrol and reinforcements trailed behind, heads down, trying to salvage what little dignity they had left. I stepped out into the sunlight, brushing dust off my jeans, feeling the weight of the situation settle. It was over. The standoff, the absurd escalation, the psychological warfare, it had all reached its climax and ended with a simple fact: I had won. My barn remained untouched, my rules respected, and my sanity preserved. The neighbors were still lingering, a mixture of awe, amusement, and relief on their faces. I caught Mrs. Henderson peeking from behind her rose bushes, a small smile playing on her lips, and old Mr. leaning against his fence, shaking his head in disbelief. Word would travel fast, and I knew this story would become part of neighborhood lore, whispered over backyard fences for months, maybe years. My SWAT team quietly disassembled their setup, loading gear back into vehicles with practiced efficiency. Not a word was spoken, they knew their role and they had executed it flawlessly. I gave them a small nod of thanks, and their subtle acknowledgement was enough. They were professionals, yes, but they had also been my secret weapon in a battle most people wouldn't have imagined could exist over a barn inspection. Karen's defeat was more than just about rules or fines. It was about control, about ego, about her obsession with enforcing authority in ways that had nothing to do with reason. Watching her flounder, watching her team panic, had been a lesson in human behavior, bureaucracy, and the absurd extremes people will go to when they feel threatened by something they don't understand. As I locked the barn doors behind me, I couldn't help but smile. The SWAT team had gone, the patrol had gone, and Karen had gone, leaving only the quiet satisfaction that comes from standing firm in your own space, even when absurdity strikes. The barn wasn't just a building anymore, it was a symbol. A symbol of preparation, strategy, and knowing exactly when to hold your calm. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp outdoor air, and let my mind drift. Yes, there would be HOA meetings in the future, more letters, more texts, maybe even more inspections. But this experience had changed the game. Karen might think she could intimidate me again, but she had learned, albeit painfully, that her patrols and threats weren't enough, not against preparation, not against strategy, not against calm determination. The rest of the day passed quietly. I tended to the barn, checked the equipment, and even managed to laugh out loud a few times at the sheer ridiculousness of what had unfolded. I imagined Karen packing her living room, recounting the story with growing panic, and it made the memory even. It was a small victory, yes, but one that carried a lesson. Never underestimate your opponent, and always be ready when absurdity comes knocking. As evening fell, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple, I looked out over my property. The barn stood tall, undisturbed, proud in the fading light. Everything was as it should be. And in that moment, I felt a calm triumph, a quiet satisfaction that no patrol, no Karen, and no amount of bureaucracy could ever take away. Life returned to normal, or at least, the kind of normal where I could enjoy it without fear of unexpected inspections. I had my barn, my land, and my peace. And somewhere out there, Karen was probably plotting her next move, unaware that preparation and patience had already won this round. Sometimes, the smallest structures, like a barn at the edge of your property, hold the greatest lessons. And sometimes, standing firm, keeping calm, and being ready for anything can turn what seems like a simple inspection into an unforgettable victory. As I walked back into the barn, closing the doors behind me, I knew one thing for certain: HOA Karen had underestimated me once, and she would remember it for a very long time. And honestly, that was enough. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.